Okay, this is a brief manual for using the Uni-Dyno Dyno interface. First off, you've got this screen area up here, which is where you want to put your indicators. You just go click on each one of the indicators and add them one by one. This is a round dial gauge, so I'll click on there. To move the dial gauge, you right-click. You right-click and it will tell you that you're moving it. So if I right-click it, it says, okay, I'm moving gauge 1, move it up into the corner, and then you click it again to drop it. So it's been dropped. If you want to make it big, you grab the lower right corner and you right-click, and it'll say you're stretching it. Now you can stretch it and make it whatever size you want, make it big. Okay, so this is the round gauge. We've got a half gauge and a graph, an LED vertical bar, horizontal bar, and a number graph. So for example, if I wanted a number, I just click on there, and now I've got a number box. Similarly, I right click on it to move it, and it tells you you're moving your second gauge. Move it down here, and maybe I want to make it a little bit bigger, so I will stretch it from the lower right corner. So click it with the right click so you get it the right size, and you click it, and now you've got the big number. Let's put in a few more gauges, just sort of arbitrarily. Grab this gauge. Again, we're going to move it, so we right-click it anywhere. We move it over, and we click it again to drop, and we stretch it by grabbing the corner, stretch it, and make it big. Okay, so there's a number, there's a round gauge, there's a half round gauge. This is a graph. Drag it over here. Again, I'm going to stretch it from the lower right corner, and we'll make it huge. Use up some space. Finally, we've got a horizontal color bar. Let's put a big horizontal color bar in there, and maybe we'll put it down here, and we'll stretch it to make it big. Okay, and I won't get too big. I'll make it like that. Okay. So there's just a few of these. Now, if you accidentally pick one, let's say we'll pick another one of these, and we'll say, oh, okay, oops, move it someplace. If you don't want it, you can get rid of it, and we'll show you in a second how to get rid of it. That's when we set them up. So I'll move this guy into position, and later we'll get rid of it. Okay, we'll drag him, make him a little bit bigger. Okay, now our screen is set up. When you exit, it will come back up with exactly the same screen. You can also save it under your name, and this will be your screen setup. And when you start the program, if you want to load a different screen setup, you just click on load so that you can get the other screen setup. Okay, so this is how you set them up. Now I want to choose what channel of information goes to this one. All you do is you left click. If you left click, it will give you the option. There's RPM 1, which is your dyno RPM, RPM 2, which is your engine. You've got a calculated engine RPM, so maybe I want this to be my calculated engine RPM, or you've got a bunch of other options. So you just say, okay, he'll be the calculated engine RPM set, and now he's your engine RPM. So here's my engine RPM, there's my dyno RPM, and you can select each one of these can be anything. Like, for example, I could check this to be analog 1, which will be my air-fuel ratio, something like that. If you don't want this, you click on it, and then you say remove, and it's set. Okay, now it's gone. So that's how you set up the screen. Like I said, the screen is saved every time you save it. Pretty straightforward. Now, one of the things we want to look at is calibration for everything on the dyno. So you just click on the calibrations, and you get the calibration page. So you set up your roller diameter over here, your friction, the inertia of your dynamometer is very important. And then if you want to include a little bit of engine inertia, you can put in engine inertia. Typically, that's quite a small number, 0.01 or something like that. And you include the gear ratio, and then it shows you how much your equivalent engine inertia is compared to your dyno inertia. Maximum RPM and maximum torque, a couple of the typical parameters. Also, we can automatically calibrate friction. We'll do that later. Now, also, for each one of these channels, you have a whole bunch of different calibrations. You can change the name and the units, offset and factor. Then we've got a minimum and a maximum. So like on the graphic display, it goes from the minimum to the maximum. And we have two different alarm states. So below alarm 1, it's green. Between alarm 1 and 2, it's yellow. Between alarm 2 and max, it's red. And so that also sets up these lines, and it'll set up the different colors in the graphs. So you can set those up along with filtering, and then how many ticks. So for example, you'll see we've got how many major ticks here. We've got 12 because it's 12,000 RPM. And so in that case, we're talking about the engine channel. So we've got 12 major ticks and 2 minor ticks, meaning that you've got 2 separate places between the major ticks in there. So you can set up all that in here. When you're happy with it, you say set. If you don't want to change anything, you say cancel. That's the basic calibrations. Now, loading of the dyno is done in 4 different ways. You can use a manual load. So let's have one of these. Let's change this guy to be the actual load. So let me click on this guy and I'll set him up for load. Okay, so now he's the load. If I come over to my manual load and click on it, it should give me 5% load. Blink. Now we've got 5% load. And then you can increase or decrease the load by clicking the plus or the minus. Alternatively, we could go to speed control mode. So here now we're in speed control mode at, in this case, 3,000 RPM. Well, our dyno isn't spinning, and so we're not going to get any loading. The loading goes to 0. There's also a 2-point loading for dyno pulls. So you've got to start and stop dyno RPM, and you've got a percentage load, maybe 10% at the start, 5% at the stop speed, or you can go to an acceleration mode, which starts at the start load and start RPM, but then it increases at 300 RPM per second. So you can set that up over here. So you just choose what your load mode is. Now, one of the things we want to be able to set up also is the gear ratio. So first, let me spin up. In this case, it's an electric motor. And we see that it's spinning at almost 3,000 RPM. Well, maybe in this case, we're saying it's about 3,000 RPM, and we're saying our engine RPM is 6,000. Well, yeah, it's 6,000 RPM because our gear ratio is 2. So if you click on your gear ratio box, you get this guy, and that allows you to set up your gear ratio. Either you can pick it as 2, or for example, I could pick that I want to spin at 4,000 RPM. If I'm running my engine at 4,000 RPM, then you set your engine at 4,000 RPM, and that gives you your gear ratio, and then you click on here to set it. If you want to set it to a given gear ratio, you put that gear ratio in here. It shows you what the calculated RPM is, and then you set it. Or in this case, I'll just cancel because we've got it right. Next thing we maybe want to do is set up for what is our vehicle name. So in here you can set your vehicle name, and you can also browse on your computer to where you want to save it. So you can browse to any place on your computer, and that's your save path, and then you can put the vehicle's name in there. So in this case it's Bajaj test because we were just testing a Bajaj. So you can set that up there. And it'll tell you the name of your vehicle here, and it'll tell you the path for where you're saving the data right there. So after that, basically what we need to do is do a run, and we'll look at the graph. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut down the motor, and you see the motor speed goes down, and you see the graph goes down. Once it goes down, then what I'll do is I'll say, okay, I want to spin it up using maybe 2-point loading. And I'm not actually loading in this case, but this is just to show you. So I'm in 2-point loading, and the instructions are here say increase speed. So it's telling you open your throttle to basically start the loading. So as I increase the speed, I'm going to get to my start speed, which is 500 RPM on the dyno, and then it will start to give me load. So you'll notice the load will go up. And as I continue to increase, he's going to run up to 2,000 RPM. That's my stop speed. Well, 2,000 RPM is too low. Let's run it up to 2,900, 2950. So you can just type that in. Now we're going to run to 2,950. So our loading will start at 500. It'll stop at 2,050. Now this guy spins up almost instantly because it's an electric motor, but you can see how it works. Let me spin it up, and you'll see that it'll tell you, okay, loading. Now it's giving you the load. The load went up and came back down, and it gives you this temporary graph. Well, we're at full speed now, and he's telling us return to idle. So if I move this guy over, it says, okay, return to idle. So I'll shut it down. Speed comes down. We return to idle. And then it's going to ask me if I want to save that data. So now it's asking me to save the data. You can save it or not. Also, it will close the small graph and automatically graph it if you ask it to. when it's graphed it, you can see that this is your torque and this is your power, and you get some statistics down here. So if you click in here, click anywhere, it'll give you the statistics. So at this position, there's your RPM, your torque, your power, and your air-fuel ratio, or whatever. So you can select different channels over here. So down here is the air-fuel ratio, but instead of air-fuel ratio, I could select something like load. And so the load decreases as the RPM increases, sure. Instead of torque, instead of total torque, maybe I could select engine torque. So, and there's my engine torque. So now this is the torque of the engine, which is just calculated by the gear ratio. And you can also see things like maybe here my power and horsepower is very rough. It goes up and down. I might want to add some filtering to that. Well, fine. We can come out here, go back to our calibration, go to our power and horsepower, and look at our filter. Our filter is 0. So if I want heavier filtering on that, we'll put a number like 0.8 or something like that, set it. Now if we redo it, we'll see that the horsepower is much smoother. So we'll do another pull. Gives me this temporary graph, and now we can see we've got a much smoother curve down here. We also have a different torque curve because this was the dyno torque and this is the engine torque, so it should be a factor of about a half. Okay, we're spun up. We'll spin it down. It will close this automatically, and it will open the big graph. And it opens the big graph because we've selected it to open the big graph in here. Cancel this guy. So there's a switch here. It says automatically graph it. If you shut this off, it will not automatically jump to this graph. If you click that on, it will automatically jump to the graph. Now you can see our power and horsepower is much smoother because we included that filtering. So here's one pull. If you want to pull up data from another pull, you just click on here and select the other pull. I don't remember which these are. I'll just pull one of them up. So I've got some other pull over here, and clearly it's done to a very different scale. I've got like a factor of 1,000 in there, so you can't see the original data, but you can see the data in here. So you can see, you click on some point, and you say, oh, the torque is 1 versus 400 because there was some crazy factor in this. But it'll allow you to overlay 2 of them. You can print this, so it'll make a JPEG of this. You can create a report if you click on here. So it pulls all of that data into Excel, and so you've got this Excel spreadsheet with your screenshot and with all the data in it. And basically that's it. I mean, we can go over the tear and a bunch of other things, but that's the basic setup for how you run the software. Like I said, if you exit it and then run it again, you should get the same screen. So I'll rerun it and I get back the same screen. And if you want to make it full screen, you just click here, it's full screen, and you can make it, you know, whatever size you want. Like I said, you can also save different views. You save views with different names and pull each one of them open.